Hey, good morning, everybody. I'm going to talk to you about the definition of done. And I'm going to start with a really simple picture of a road that I think everyone can agree is not done. And when it comes to things like roads, the state of finished or unfinished is very clear. So here's another picture of a road which is clearly done. And this road will stay like this for decades to come. So I made this highly scientific chart for today, which shows the pace of innovation on one axis and then how roads developed over time on the other. And you can see that there was like huge increases in innovation in the Roman Empire era. Nothing much happened over the course of the following 100 years. And in the 19th, 20th century, you started to see technologies develop that gave you roads that looked like that. The challenge for us, or maybe the opportunity for us, is that roads and software are completely different. And so with roads, the pace of innovation is very low, at least in our current society, whereas with software, it's very high. Software changes rapidly, day after day. And with roads, there's no direct competition, so there isn't someone over some other hill trying to build a different type of road, a better type of road than that road. There's no direct competition. There's like indirect competition, like rail and flight and so on. But it's basically a kind of solved problem, and it's easy to see when it's done. Whereas with software, there's tons and tons of direct competition. And even if you find yourself in a space where there's very little competition, your success in that space will soon see that there will be many, many a startup chasing your success. So in software, nothing is ever done. Nothing's ever done. And I think that's just a true reality that everyone has to embrace. And so the real question then, and the thing to think about, is in a state where nothing's ever done, if you're slow at shipping product changes, if you're slow at that, you're effectively moving backwards. You're not even standing still, right? Because everything around you is moving at such a rapid pace, you'll soon find yourself behind. And so to illustrate this point and kind of really bring it home to people this morning, because I think it's really, really important, I've introduced this character. This is the Grim Reaper, in case anyone's not familiar. This is death. This is death for any project or company or product. The pace of innovation is so fast, you need to obsess about moving quickly. So the real question then isn't when something is done, because nothing is ever done. It's really, when do you stop working on one thing and work on something else? And then more importantly, when do you go back and start working on that first thing again? Right? Because in software, you will always, always have to go back and work on that first thing again. So I'm going to talk about three things today to try and illustrate this, and I'm going to build out a system for you. The first thing I'm going to talk about is inputs. In other words, there are inputs in deciding what you need to build, and you must build something. There's outputs. You must ship the thing that you've built. And then there's outcomes. So you need to know its impact. And the good news for everybody is that there is a system in which inputs, outputs, and outcomes all connect. And it's the same for all of us. And what I'm going to show you is dead simple. So this is the system in which we all build product. I'm going to assume that everyone here has a product and engineering team. And you may call them something else. Maybe it's developers versus software engineers. But basically, it's the same for all of us. We all work in these teams. Some may be big, some may be small. But inside every company, we have these product and engineering teams, and they do projects, which is pretty straightforward, I would hope. Those projects change the product. And that is the point. That is the point of doing these projects. They change the product. And when you change the product, you again would hope that it will change the behavior of your customers. Again, this might sound dead simple, but it's the same for all of us. You do projects that change the product, and that changes the behavior of customers. And this system, this really simple system, needs to be extremely deliberate. So when you think about the changes that you see in customers, and by the way, you can use users, customers, I don't mind what term you use. When you think about the changes in behavior in customers, again, you kind of assume some basic things to be true. One is that you have existing customers, and for those people, I'd imagine the change you're trying to bring about is that they will use the product more deeply, or they'll broaden their usage of the product, they'll use more of the product and get more invested in it, or they will go deep in their usage of the things they already do today. And I've got a little dollar sign here to kind of illustrate that. I hope that you have a good monetization strategy in the company where people changing their behavior and doing those things results in money for the company. Again, that's what pays your salaries, so this is an important system. Okay, on the other side, you have new customers, and this may be people who need to sign up, or maybe if you're an e-commerce company or something like that, it's people who are using the thing for the first time, they're making their first purchase or whatever. But you have new customers, and again, I'm going to assume I'm not really going to talk about monetization today, and so I'm going to assume that the company has got good practices in place where you're able to monetize that usage well. So this is a simple system that we all live and breathe, whether we like it or not. So the bad news is that the good news is that this is simple and the same for all of us. The bad news is that every single competitor has exactly the same system trying to do exactly the same things. And if you don't obsess about this system and obsess about the ways in which it works, they will. And that's far more important than worrying about whether the project is done or not. All right, so let's get rid of that guy. And we're going to make this a little bit simpler. I'm going to take away those kind of two axes around monetization and usage. I'm just going to put a little dollar sign here to say, okay, so I'm going to assume that works pretty well. Not to say that you have to monetize every single change in customer behavior, but over the long course of it, you run a good business. Okay, so that's basically simple things. So let's bring in some other stuff here. Here's inputs. And for the most part, inputs tell you what projects to do. And for most people, inputs look like roadmaps. So you take these inputs, you build a roadmap, and that roadmap will tell you what projects to do. You then have outputs. This is shipping in almost all cases. You take these inputs, you do projects, and then you ship something, and then that changes the product. And then the third one here is outcomes, which is the impact of those things. And so you take these inputs, do projects, change the product, ship that to customers, and then, by design, you'd hope, otherwise there's no point, that customer behavior will change. And that's the outcome. That's the impact that those projects will have. Okay, so hopefully this is so far straightforward. So the reason I'm talking about all this is because there's a lot of energy in our community around outcomes over output. So if you go back here and see this chart, you have inputs, outputs, and outcomes. And for the longest time, we didn't think a ton about outcomes, but now it's got huge energy. And so you have books like this from Josh Seiden. The reason I'm showing this book, by the way, is because it's excellent. And I'm going to argue for outputs in a minute. This is an excellent book, and it takes 40 minutes to read. I highly recommend you get it. But this book is making the case for outcomes over output. Another book that some of you may be familiar with is Marty Kagan's book, Inspired. Again, it's a classic book about product management and building products. And this is a photograph that I took of some of the inside of the book. I've even marked it with a red pen, and it says, it's all about outcome rather than output. So Marty is also making the case for outcomes over output. Again, a brilliant book, and the reason I bring it up and use it as an example is because I think everyone should read it. Okay, so we've got a lot of energy in the community around outcomes over output. So the question for me is why? Why is there so much energy? Why are people like Josh and Marty, who could be doing a lot of other things, focusing their energy on trying to persuade people to think about outcomes instead of output? And the reason I think is pretty straightforward. If you go back over the course of the last kind of few years, this was the obsession. It was just ship, ship, ship. And our friend the Grim Reaper is back because we were told it's ship or die. If you do not ship, your company will not succeed, your product will not succeed. And so it was all about shipping, and it was all about that middle dimension of output. And if you look at this system again, it is true that we have become obsessed with output. That is absolutely true. But I'm going to make the case that we need to think about all three equally. So inputs, outputs, and outcomes, all three matter equally. And it's the system that matters the most. So if you look at and think about these things, it's actually the system and thinking in systems and thinking about every constituent of the system that is way more important than focusing on any one of, as at the Grim Reaper moving slides, I'm not sure what's happening. But that's way more important than focusing on just outcomes or just outputs. Okay, so all three of these matter equally. And this is the system, okay? So inputs, outputs, and outcomes. And I'm going to go through each one in turn. I'm going to focus most on inputs. So I'm going to start with inputs, go pretty heavy there, and talk a little bit about outputs and a little bit about outcomes. Okay, so inputs. This is where inputs fit in this system. Inputs are the things that you bring in order to decide what your roadmap is and decide what projects to do. So, as a great system designer once said, shit in equals shit out. And that's the first thing you need to understand about this diagram and these systems. There's actually two types of this. There's one, how you decide what projects to do, and two, how you frame projects. And both of these things can be done excellently and done terribly. So let's look at the first one, how you decide what projects to do. So again, remember that we have these inputs which decide what projects we do. So I'm going to show you how we work at Intercom and show you the things that we do and the tools that we have to make sure that these inputs are good inputs and not bad inputs. And you can kind of take these and adapt them, but there's very, very similar types of tools and systems available in your company, and you can design this thing yourself. And if you take anything from this, it's that I want you to think about the design of this overall system. So here's the first thing. Here's things that we use as inputs. And you can already see that in this kind of basic system we now have this subsystem, this kind of new little mini system over here that's telling us what goes into the inputs, and that's going to tell us what projects to do. So for example, we have our mission and vision. We have a mission for the company. We have a vision for the future. I'm not going to show you it today, but it's written up. It's like a 3-page doc. We spend a lot of time on it, and it's very clear. The second thing is that we've got a business strategy. So as we look ahead over the next kind of like 1, 2, 3 years, we have a strategy in place that tells us how we're going to achieve our vision. So all these 5 things are deeply connected and more or less in this order. So our strategy tells us how we're going to achieve that vision. The third thing is business goals. So we do have quarterly goals, we do have annual goals. Some of them are revenue oriented, some of them are not. But those goals are kind of pulled out of that strategy, and then that strategy is there to support that mission. The fourth thing is that we have prospective customers. We have people who do not use Intercom today, and we want them to, assuming that it solves a problem that they have. And so we have prospective customers. Our sales team talk to our prospective customers every day of the week. There are literally dozens and dozens of conversations happening between our sales team and prospective customers. And there are reasons why people decide to buy Intercom, and there are reasons why people decide not to buy Intercom. And so a whole input is us understanding that. And then on the flip side, we have existing customers. Our customer support team has thousands and thousands of conversations with existing customers every day. Amazing, huge insight. And so we've a process, I'm going to show you in a sec, to gather all that insight from those thousands of conversations and aggregate them and make sense of them and make sure that they're a really high quality input. So we take all these 5 things and we have a little kind of system where they come together, and they're the inputs that tell us what projects to do. So here's basically how it works. The leadership team, so I'm on the leadership team. There's 10 of us. We kind of run each of the functions like product and engineering and marketing and sales, etc. And then the leadership of the company. And so we set the vision and we set the strategy, and that's what we do. And you'll see in a second, even though I run our product team, I do not get involved in any projects or telling people that they have to do project X or that they should do project Y. That's not how it works at all. And that's how we think it should work. So leadership, vision, and strategy. We then have like our finance team, our business operations team, a bunch of other people with the leadership team setting business goals. We then have our research team, our product research team, and our customer support team, and they collaborate really deeply to create this thing that we call the customer voice report. I'm going to show you it in a second, but it's basically those thousands of conversations aggregated and made sense of. And then lastly, we have our sales team and our marketing team. And our sales team and marketing team collaborate to create this thing called problems to be solved. And this thing, problems to be solved, took us many iterations to get right. In the early days, when our sales team first started, so Intercom was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and our sales team is maybe 3 or 4 years old. And so along the journey, we brought in a sales team and started to understand how to work together. And in the early days, what the sales team would bring us in the product team was feature requests. They would say like, hey, customer X needs feature Y. If they get it, then we can close the deal because like Intercom is now fit for purpose. And we did not think that was a good way to work. And so what we said to the sales team was, we do not need to understand the feature request specifically, although that's useful. We need to understand why those customers are asking for those features. Like what's behind, what's the problem that they have? What's the business problem that they're trying to solve using Intercom as a potential solution? And so we evolved this thing together called problems to be solved. And that's very specific language. It's kind of jobs to be done in a way, but it's what are the biggest problems that our prospective customers have that we can solve. And if we can solve them, they'll adopt Intercom and grow our business. So pretty simple. So we have all these inputs, and then they all come together to form a kind of a doc, basically, these days, and it's evolved over time. But it's basically a document that says, hey, product and engineering teams, here is all the inputs that you need. You have our vision, our strategy, and we've got our business goals. They may be annual, quarterly. We have our customer voice report. This is what all our existing customers are saying, and we have our problems to be solved. And that goes to the product and engineering teams, and then they set the roadmaps, right? So each product and engineering team, we have about 15 product and engineering teams, and they're quite small. They're all less than 10 people, and they set the roadmaps. So again, the leadership team does not set the roadmaps. We are almost like 2 steps removed from it. Obviously, there's checks and balances in place. We do look at roadmaps and have opinions here and there, but it's feedback. It's not mandate. So that's basically how it works. So let me show you 2 of these. I think you can imagine what a vision or strategy might look like. I think you can imagine what business goals look like. Here's what the customer voice report looks like, and here's how it works. So this here is a conversation in Intercom. So our customer support team use Intercom to talk to our customers. You can use any tool you like. I'm sure every single person here uses some piece of software in their company to talk to customers. There's many out there. This process works for any of them. And here's how it works. So here's a conversation, and this is someone talking about, giving us feedback about our feature called campaigns. And our campaigns feature, we're actually redesigning it. It's kind of hard to understand. And so this person is basically saying, like, I don't know how to use this thing. And screenshots, and I'm lost. Like, please help. And so the customer support team member in that instance can maybe help them out of that hole. But what they do is they tag every single conversation. And they tag every single conversation with the team. What team is this? A campaigns team, and the type of problem it is. So like, hey, this is a usability issue. Hey, this is a feature request. Hey, this is like some other type of thing. And we have a whole set of categories, and they just tag the conversation. And they tag every single conversation. So every week, we are getting thousands of conversations tagged by the customer support team. What that means is we can do things like this. We can basically like pull, and this probably doesn't make much sense to most people, but we can pull a pie chart, for example, here, an aggregation of data, and say, hey, we've a team called Team Inbox who work on our inbox. Hey, Team Inbox, here's like all the stuff we're hearing from our existing customers. And the theme around a lot of this right now is like more power, like more sophistication, better reporting, better workflows, right? But it's all in here. And you can click into this thing and get down to this level. This example here, you can kind of see in the 3rd column, it says theme. The theme is advanced editing. And then what does this customer want to do with it? And you can link to the conversation. Well, in this case, they want an updated emoji set. And another customer wants to insert specific GIFs. And another one wants to add custom GIFs. Another wants an updated emoji set. People are very passionate about emoji and GIFs. But you can see the level of granularity this has, right? So the team, in this case, the inbox team, can look at these themes or these specific requests, right? So this thing is really powerful. And then it means we can do things like this. We can write reports that say, like, hey, the research team put these reports together and say, hey, the biggest themes are X and Y. And in this case, it was like, we pulled all the recent conversations from the first 14 days of someone using the product. It's like, hey, in the first 14 days, what do people say? Like, where do they get stuck? We can pull a report like this, which obviously helps us to decide what to do. Again, this is like a really big input. So that's our existing customers. And the problems we solved process looks very, very similar. And so what the team there do, the sales team do, is more or less exactly the same thing, only it's in Salesforce. So you can see here, there's a column here that says cases. That's a Salesforce case. It's like a record of this conversation. And so they do exactly the same thing. Every sales conversation that they log in Salesforce, they tag it, they annotate it. And again, this is a process that we've agreed with them and worked and collaborated on. And they tag it, and then they can create exactly the same type of reports. And so when you go back to the inputs, you start to see that we have all these rich inputs. We've got like existing customer requests, we have prospective customer requests, we have guidance from the leadership team, we have business goals, and we have a little roadmap process then to decide how to take all those inputs, put them on a roadmap, and then turn them into projects. And so then the projects change the product and change the behavior for customers. And there's obviously then a feedback loop here, where as things change in the product and customer behavior changes, those things, if they're important enough, will bubble all the way back up into the customer voice report. We'll hear about them all over again. And so already you're starting to see that if you're done, you'll kind of know you're done because you don't hear about this stuff anymore. You solved the problem you set out to. But if you're not done, you'll start to see this thing come back. And if I've learned anything over the last few years at Intercom, it's that everything eventually comes back, right? Every company's moving forward. Things are getting better all the time. Everything eventually comes back. Okay, so that was the first, how you decide what projects to do. And here's the second, how you frame projects. So again, back to our system of inputs, outputs, and outcomes. And the biggest mistake I've seen people make and product teams make is that the projects they do are framed as a business problem. They're framed as a business problem, not a customer problem. And I'm going to make the case that that's not good practice. That's not the right way to frame the thing if you want to see success, and success being behavior change in customers. And instead, these projects must be customer problems. They must be customer problems because those customer problems result in changes in the product that customers can value, and those things end up in business results. So rather than starting with business problems, you should start with customer problems and business results. And of course, this thing then loops back on itself. So is a business result, good or bad, an input? Absolutely, absolutely is. And this is in many ways the conclusion of the talk. We'll get to that in a little bit. So projects must be framed as a customer problem, not a business problem, so that customers see value in the product change and then change their behavior. Okay, so I'm going to give you one simple example of this. We had a project last year where we did this all wrong. And the project was to increase the number of seats used by Intercom customers. So one way we charge is by seat. So if someone has a seat, we charge them X amount of dollars. If they add a teammate, like in a support team, add another person, it's another seat, it's more dollars. And so we had this project to increase the number of seats used by Intercom customers, which was a business problem, and this project went nowhere. Nothing ever, it didn't even get close to getting shipped. Because we quickly realized in writing up the problem that it was like all wrong, business problems. And the problem was like, why? Why would a customer want to add seats? We want them to add seats because we want them to pay us more money, of course, like any business. But why would they want to add seats? And it turns out we didn't have any good rationale or reasoning at all, and it didn't reflect in the problems we solved or the customer voice report. And so we just didn't do the project. It just went nowhere, went around in circles. So you can see that the business results must come from the inputs. They must come from the inputs across through the projects into the customer problems and then down into the business results. So two key takeaways here about inputs. One is build a strong inputs system and process, let that guide roadmaps. And two, frame projects as customer problems that come from those inputs. Okay, so that's inputs. Next is outputs. And outputs is going to be really simple. I'm going to just make the case for one thing. So outputs, if you remember in this little system, outputs in at least my explanation of this is shipping. It's shipping product. And again, it should be shipping things that change the product. Now that could be in the background. Maybe you're making the product more secure, more stable, right? But the product should be changing. That's the whole point. So again, outputs are getting a bit of a hard time at the minute. We have, Josh's excellent book about outcomes. And to fully understand this thing, you should definitely read it, like I said. And say Marty's book about Inspired is making the case for outcomes over outputs. And again, you should read that to get this full picture. And it is true, absolutely true, that way too many people building software are obsessed with counting things that are outputs, like story points or whatever other point system you use to count, things like that. We do count outputs, and people are obsessed with counting outputs versus understanding customer problems. And that's real, and it's true, and I don't question that for a second. However, it's the system. It's the system that matters, not suddenly going all in on outcomes. Hey, it's outcomes time, right? And so outputs matter too. We deeply believe this. We've written about this for years. This is a post from many years ago by Dara, our head of engineering, that says shipping is your company's heartbeat. Shipping is literally the lifeblood. Back to the Grim Reaper and the competition and the fierceness of competition in any technology company these days. Shipping is your company's heartbeat. And I'm going to show you our product changes page because I'm going to show you how much we obsess about this. So this is the most recent thing that we've shipped. Again, we're a Series D company. We're not that big. We don't have a huge product and engineering team. This is October the 3rd, which I think was last Wednesday, where we shipped a product change, like a meaningful product change. We told customers about it. And then like the one before that I'm going to realize I can't read the dates of anymore is September 30th. So October 3rd, September 30th, we added some improvements to product tours. Then in September 24th, 6 days before that, we had reports improvements to our reports product. What else? September 18th, 6 days before that, every new conversation is triaged with inbound custom bots, another product change that customers really care about. And then we have September 13th, September 12th, right? So in the last 3 weeks, we've shipped 6 really meaningful, valuable product changes from those inputs. And the reason I'm showing you this isn't to kind of backslap us and say this is awesome. This is necessary. This is necessary. Do I got the Grim Reaper here? No, that's a pity. I should have had him here. This is necessary. Like there's other companies doing this, and you have got to maintain your obsession with output and your obsession with speed. Oh, this all has to be done again. Hang on. All right. So, sorry, these are all catching up. All right, so we're back. So last year, never do that. Never go back to animations. All right. Last year, we shipped over 150 product changes. That's 3 a week, right? And actually, turns out I do have the Grim Reaper. I forgot I added him on this slide instead. Right, so this is critical. Don't lose sight of outputs. Don't lose sight of outputs. Another thing that's happening is you're seeing more and more talk of the feature factory, right? So like John Cutler wrote this and gave a talk, and it's because generally I agree with most of the sentiment in the idea of a feature factory. You can't imagine what that is. A big factory, your product and software team are a big factory, like shipping all these features, and no one's really paying that much attention to the features. And this thing is gaining traction. So like here's confessions of a former feature factory PM, and moving from a feature factory to a user value creation organization. And so I was talking about feature factories with Des, our co-founder, last week, and one of the kind of points that Des made to me was, if you want to ship consistent, high-quality product, which is what we're trying to do here, turns out factories are fucking awesome for that. Factories are really good at that. If you want to ship great product consistently over and over and over again, and if you want to build this conveyor belt of assuming you have amazing inputs, you want to build this machine that just outputs all this great product day after day, week after week, turns out factories are great. And there's a lot we can learn about factories. So let's stop hating on the factories. All right, so reminder for this. Get your inputs right. Obsess about the pace of which you ship these things. Obsess about it. And shipping is your heartbeat. The minute you start thinking about it as your heartbeat, it just changes your mental state, We want our hearts to keep beating. Okay, so lastly, outcomes. Again, it's a reminder. Here's this real simple system of how we all build product. Outcomes are the impact, and this to me is actually quite straightforward. And if you want details, again, you should read Josh's book about this. I'm going to keep this really simple. So I'm going to remind us of a few things, right? So here's our outcomes, and here is the customer problems, right? Changes in the product, and then business results. So outcomes are business results. And we also saw that inputs, which is our roadmaps, which is the projects we do, should be framed as customer problems. That results in changes in the product, and that results in business results. And so this thing about customer problems is a big deal, not business problems. The business results come from the customer problems. And I said that projects must be framed as a customer problem, not a business problem, so that customers can see value in the product change and then change their behavior. So So therefore what? Customer problems must have clear proposed business results. That's how the system works, right? If you don't have clear proposed business results for this customer problem, like why are you doing the project? Like why are you doing it? Like if it's not going to help the company that you work for and are trying to further, then what's the point? So knowing the system and how it all connects together is actually the power here. The last thing I want to remind you of is we saw this like mini system, this like mini subsystem up here about inputs and mission and vision and strategy and so on, right? So that's feeding the inputs, which is feeding the projects that you do. And we saw that there's this loop that goes back, which is that the behavior change in customers goes back in, and maybe you got it right, and it's like, hey, that thing is off the list. People are happy, right? Do we close those deals that were like open? Or those existing customers who were saying they might churn, they might change product, they're happy now, right? So or we didn't solve the problem. We didn't solve it. At Intercom, something I'm not going to talk about today is we aggressively scope projects down to the very minimum. And so maybe we didn't solve the problem first time. We need to like go again, try it again. And in fact, this is how this whole thing works. This is how this whole system works. And in some ways, it's dead simple. You have inputs, projects, customer problems, then business results, and then the business results and the changes in customer behavior in the middle loop back and become inputs again. And this thing happens over and over and over and over again, like tens and dozens and hundreds of times over the course of your company, or over the course of a year potentially. Every single project has this loop. And so what I would advocate for is not obsessing about outcomes or outputs, but obsessing about the system and designing the system. This is actually how you can get great things done. So you're never done. We should embrace that idea. And instead, we got some wonky formatting. Imagine this looked really great. Oh, it does. Oh, down here it doesn't. Oh, sorry. Never mind. There's still a line there. All right, ignore. So instead, focus your energy on designing the full system, inputs, outputs, and outcomes. And that's it from me. Thanks a lot.